to be quelled, they need to be suppressed, they need to be erased. This resentment, that's what is fueling this Hindu messiah, that is what is fueling this agenda. Be it Leicester, be it Mississauga, or be it New Jersey, or be it any other part of the world where there is this huge misinformation using the word Hindu, Hindus, Hinduism, Hindutva, different ways to brand a nation's prime minister elected twice with overwhelming majority, voted, rated the most popular leader across the world, among the tallest of the global leaders. To brand him as a Hindu nationalist prime minister comes with a certain agenda. To deliberately pick up indexes and data points that will show a nation which is growing at as the fastest nation in the world at an economic pace. A nation that is poised to become the world's third largest economy very soon. Such a nation to portray it as a nation that is perhaps in a huge amount of decay as society is concerned, huge amount of penury with its people concerned, to try and deliberately project it. Is there an agenda, and does it stem from deep-rooted resentment? Salvatore Babones had spoken to CNN News 18 and spoken to us here on the Right Stand on the 16th of September 2022. But today, on the 7th of November 2022, he has penned a detailed opinion piece on firstpost.com. Do peruse it. I'm just putting out some of the salient features, the highlights here. What does he say? Professor Babones says, anti-Hindu Western intellectuals do not fear the rise of India. They resent it. So it's not coming, this hate is not coming from, it's not stemming from hate also. He says it's resentment. They just don't want it. Then, just as Western anti-Semites are offended by the success of Israel, Western anti-Hinduists are offended by the success of India. They can't accept the idea of a strong, vibrant, independent Hindu majority country. They would much rather keep India weak and poor, just as their ancestors did centuries ago. That's the perception built, isn't it? You're a nation of snake charmers. All you can wear is a dhoti, half below the waist, naked above the waist. That's the kind of perception they have about this country. Pichhada hua, that has no knowledge, that needs to be educated, that's uncivilized. They want to push that, continue to push that perception. This nation, Vishwaguru, impossible. That's the core instinct. That's what Professor Babones says. The anti-Hindu movement wants to turn India into a pariah state on the Israeli model. So what they did with Israel, or attempt to do with Israel, they now want to do with Bharat, ladies and gentlemen. Decrying the Hindu messiah, that's what we are trying to understand. Let's go across to our panelists. But before that, a short excerpt of the conversation that we had here on the Right Stand with Professor Babones on the 16th of September this year. Your opinion piece on India at 75 through some very interesting observations, especially those about the independent democracy watchers who you believe perhaps owe India an apology. Why do you say so?
Well, my opinion piece is based on a research paper that's been published in Quadrant magazine and now republished on the print in India. The research paper is an examination of the three major democracy organizations: Freedom House in the United States, the Economic Intelligence Unit in the UK, and the Varieties of Democracy Institute in Sweden. In that research paper, I examine literally all of the reasons they give for India's troubling decline in democracy since 2018, and have found errors, inconsistencies, and I think outright misrepresentations in all of them.
What did you find? Was this agenda against India as a country, or was this agenda against the BJP and more specifically against Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a popularly elected Prime Minister with a larger mandate the second time around?
I don't think these organizations are anti-Modi or anti-BJP, and they're certainly not anti-India. However, these organizations reflect the opinion of the intellectuals, of the experts, of the journalists, of the academics who report back to them. That is, these organizations don't collect their own information. They use information that's out in the public sphere, and they hire academics and journalists to write sections of their reports for them. So a report from one of these organizations may be 250 pages long. The India section is a couple of pages, and that's written on behalf of the organization by somebody. So I suspect what's happened is that these reports on India simply reflect the overall opinion of India's intellectual class. Not just India's intellectual class, but the expat or NRI intellectual class who are concerned with Indian matters. Look, a professor at Harvard who studies India, who may be of Indian background, has much more influence on a report like this than an Indian author, in India who is not connected to international organizations. The report reflects the politics of those who are contributing to it, not necessarily any conspiracy by these organizations to downgrade India.
So the agenda to downgrade India, and it stems from a deep-rooted resentment saying, how can this nation of Hindus, snake charmers, rise? These pichdas, these people who need to be civilized by us, we taught them civilization, we taught them. How can they be? And it is also being stemmed or penned by those who have gone from here and have embraced this whole Western elitist notion about Bharat. Now let's try and look at some of the instances. There's a report on Leicester clashes that's now come out, which comes out and says there is no Hindutva or RSS extremism involved, whereas it was painted as a Hindutva and RSS driven narrative. Again, politically inclined, fueled narrative. Group of influencers peddled a very, very fake narrative. The influencers have links to terrorism. The fake narrative peddled to instigate violence. This is what happened with the Leicester clashes. This is the reality that's coming through. So once again, the academia, the intelligentsia coming together, ganging up to create these narratives that will push a model similar to the Israeli model. Just other them, separate them, isolate them, and then box them into a corner and keep them there. This is caught out, and that's what was caught out, and that's why Dr. Chris Allen at Leicester had to step down, because his agenda was called out. Hindu bashing, is it steeped in resentment, is the question that we ask. And where does this stem from? How many agree with Professor Babonis? How many would perhaps expand on this and also call out the academia in the West? He says they've ganged up with the Islamists. The Western elite have ganged up with the Islamists to push this narrative, which is also stemming from academia, who claim to have authority on India. Well, whether they do or not, or are they coming with a particular prism, we'll get into that. Dr. Makarand Paranspe, Professor JNU, former director of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, with us, joining us from Florida. Makarandji, namaste. Such a pleasure to have you on this show. It's been a long while, and I'm glad
to be on your show.
And I'm glad that it's happening. Vasik, writer and commentator and counter-extremist analyst, is also joining us from London. Vasikji, namaste. Thank you very much. Pleasure having you on the show. Sarah L. Gates, Dharmic Ecology, Hindu human rights activist, joining us from Australia. Sarah ji, I apologize for keeping you up so late. I know it's late in the night, but it's very kind of you to have made the time and agreed to stay up and speak with us here on the show. And Dr. Vijay Lakshmi Vishwanathan is with us, author of Snakes in the Ganga, co-author with Rajiv Malhotra ji. Vijay Lakshmi ji, you were very, very candid when I was there on the book launch, when you called out the academy about what they are propagating and what they are teaching. So
Thank you so much for having me, Anand. Yeah.
So let me start. Makaran ji and Vijay Lakshmi ji, you're both joining us from Florida. I wonder what's happening there that the intelligentsia has gathered there. But let me ask you, Dr. Vijay Lakshmi ji, let me ask you first. Would you agree with Professor Babonis when he says that this stems from a certain deep-rooted resentment, and those who are offended by the rise of Bharat? This academia pushing this narrative.
Namaste, Anand. Yes, partly, but I would also blame the Indian elites and Indian educational institutions as well. So, for example, if you look at an up-and-coming, newly minted university like Kriya University in the south, which lacks total competence in Indian knowledge systems, but they have assembled Western academics to earn the credibility as an institution of eminence. Now, this does not come for free. This alliance with Western universities does not come for free. They have alliances with Yale University and MIT, and this doesn't come for free. So what does Kriya give back in return? Kriya gives back a whole lot of data on 200 Indian, just for one study, 200 Indian villages, data on their every family, 10,000 households. They have economic data on them. So that is given to Yale University. And this is in the repository of Yale's big data. Now, so that's one kind of payment. The second kind of payment is they promise to breed a new set of scholars and students on the Western ways of thinking. Now, this is not just limited to social science. Now, if you take economics, there's a Kriya University professor who has joined hands with a professor in Harvard University and Cornell to produce a paper on caste-based, how castes are segregated, and to show segregation based on caste. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That is indeed an area that should be studied, fine. But these are so one-sided because Professor Vaidyanathan, who's a great scholar who knows jati-based, varna-based economic systems, has written extensively on this subject to show how caste networks are actually very beneficial to the success of certain communities. But this research, of course, is ignored. So you can easily see that it's a one-way street on this. And Professor Vaidyanathan is cancelled, is never included in any of this. There's another Kriya professor, he's just a master's in neuroscience or something, but he teaches writing in Kriya. And he says IIT, he talks about science education, and even science education is criticized like this. He says IIT is a hotbed of discrimination. IITs survive on casteism. IITs produce caste to continue the myth of merit. This is all from Kriya University. And then he also goes on to saying Ayurveda is inexorably linked to caste and casteism, and promoting Ayurveda equals promoting caste. Now, this is coming out of Kriya. So we have to question how our Indian billionaires who support Kriya University, and Kriya supports this kind of scholarship and in the name of freedom of academic expression, and this whole ecosystem. So we also have to take some blame. We can't just assign all the blame to Western scholars and Western academics, because if we were rooted and grounded in our own Indic knowledge systems, that we have a sense of self-worth, we wouldn't be doing this. So it's happening at an individual level. It's also happening at institutional level. The new institutions we are building, unfortunately, are built like this, and that will scale up this whole thing even more.
But the academia or that we are leaning on to add value and prestige and heft, and like you said, the give and take or the quid counter happens, the quid pro happens, is with a lot which is already leaning in particular way, or it's conditioned or thinking in a particular way. Saraji, one of the interesting things that Professor Babanuj told me when I spoke with him in September is that look at how they interpret data. 2010 to 2020, anybody who understands statistics does not make a decade. It makes 11 years. So you should look at it as 2010 to 2019 or 2011 to 2020. But these people in their research papers use the data point 2010 to 2020 because that's when the number fits the narrative, when they are trying to make a case of an index. But he also turns around and says that Freedom House, Economic Intelligence Unit or VDEM, they do not write these papers. They commission it to academia, who send them these reviews. And they send them a one-page review and a note, and they add it to this entire assessment. So where would you stand? Would you agree that there is a deep-rooted resentment? Why would somebody want to have an agenda against a nation they got nothing to do with?
Well, the agenda's it's very old. It goes back and it's just morphed. So you had colonialism, and then you had neo-colonialism, and you had all kinds of different geopolitical strategies in place. And one of those strategies was to fund scholarship. So you had American and British institutions funding scholarship, and they would guide that scholarship so that it was directed in a particular manner. And they would selectively decide what types of topics would be allowed to be studied and so forth. So this has been going on for generations. It's certainly nothing new. And I think that having studied the history of the word use of Indophobia, Hinduphobia, and anti-Hindu sentiment, anti-Hindu legislation, there's around over 200 years of documented usage of these terms throughout the Western media and throughout the Indian media. And each one of those usages is a story in itself. So for every word use, you have to go and read, 10 or 20 other things to find out what context that's in. But there's been absolute vitriolic hatred, pitched against Hindus from so many different directions for such a long time. And I think it's very important not to blur it all together. So you need to know your perpetrators, you need to know your crimes, you need to know who's saying what about whom and when. And it's all very specific and it's all very complex. So I'm reluctant to say that anti-Hindu sentiment, Hindu hatred, Hinduphobia, which is actually a lot older than Islamophobia. It's 60 years older than Islamophobia. And it was coined by a Brit. So I'm reluctant to say it's any type of particular mentality. I think it's very dangerous to start saying it's fear or it's hatred or it's apathy or it's, it's resentment, because it is so diverse. When you look at the cases, if you do case studies on what is anti-Hindu hate crimes, anti-Hindu legislation, anti-Hindu policies, anti-Hindu narratives, anti-Hindu historic studies, I mean, this is just so far widely spread, and it's across every domain. It's in media, it's in academia, it's in think tanks, it's in government reports like what we've been talking about. And if you dig down into those references in these reports, some of them are absolutely absurd. And you've just got to wonder what type of academic standards these institutions are upholding. So what I found more recently is the internationalisation attempts of political lobbyists, particularly those concerned with Palestine, Kashmir, the CIA plus NRC, the farmers' issues. And then, of course, you've got issues of Islamism. Khalistan was connected to some of those protests, and you've got major unrest that's been connected to these policies. But it seems like there's agendas to internationalise India's policies or its bills, resolutions, in order to have foreign countries interfere with India's democratic status, its democratic process, its legislation. And I think this is why we're hearing a lot of trumped up allegations. And some of them are just absolutely, absurd. Like, I've read one report, I think it was the London School of Economics, it was something about WhatsApp groups and how BJP IT cells were driving communal hatred. And if you actually read the report, the outcome was that lower caste people, Muslims and other groups, Christians and so many other people, were actually committing the crimes. So it really defeated their whole narrative. It's just so many logical inconsistencies. So, no, I don't think it's just resentment. I do think there's geopolitics at play. I think institutions are accountable. And I think this has been going a long time. And it stems from anti-pagan, anti-Indigenous, anti-native sentiment, which was instrumentalised to colonise the global south. And if they could have their way, I would suspect that they want to balkanise India.
Balkanise
because
India.
It keeps everyone under control. It keeps them fighting.
Correct.
That's my perspective.
No, and you add a lot of weight to that perspective, because Professor Babanus, in his opinion piece on First Post, actually hints upon this. He says that this is how the entire colonialism, this narrative was created, and they want an extension of the same. And somewhere, does it ring a bell, Dr. Paranjpe, when Sarah Elgate says that it gives these nations a reason to interfere with our affairs, to get into, you internationalize India's policies, international laws, so that gives them a reason, oh, this nation needs us to get in, so we are getting in. It justifies their encroaching upon our space. And somewhere this word dismantle rankles. So be it hate, be it resentment, be it offense, be it however, let's just take them down.
Yes, absolutely, Anand. This is not new. 100 years ago, when India was striving for its independence, a similar series of attacks, not just on India's political aspirations, but on its culture, its religion, its civilization were mounted. And we can go back to Sri Aurobindo's wonderful defense of Indian civilization, which was later published, a series of essays that he wrote in his journal Arya, starting in 1914, but it was later published as the Foundations of Indian Culture, where you can see that there is an orchestrated attempt, as you said, to take down India. But here's the silver lining. I mean, I always try to, strategically look at what, we can get from this, from how we can benefit and learn. And this is what Sri Aurobindo says. You understand a particular alliance against India, a particular mentality, and knowing your adversaries, because I'd like to say that Sanatan Dharma has no enemies, but only adversaries, okay? But to be innocent about your adversaries and people who want to destroy you is really foolish. So it gives you Shatru Bodh. That is, you get to understand who the enemy is. And just to add to what the previous two speakers had said, I would call it an alliance, at least when it comes to the intellectual and cultural and civilizational attack on India. I would call it an alliance of red, woke, and green. Now, if we have time, I'll spell it out. Yes, but the red stands for the, the rump, the remnants of the failed leftist, Marxist, Maoist, urban Naxal, call it what you will. All of those splinters and groups which want a weak India internally, breaking India is very convenient for them because they have the delusion that there'll be a proletarian revolution in one form or another, and their outposts in the Western Academy, whether you call them post-colonialists, subalternists, or whatever. So there is the red, and then the woke. Now, this woke alliance is, to me, a quintessential anti-intellectual alliance, anti-critical. They want to bully you into basically suspending your judgment, suspending any rational inquiry, evidence-based thinking, and it's really a programmatic approach to bully you into all kinds of positions of political correctness or incorrectness, as the case may be. And their favorite bugbear, or I might even call it smokescreen, is this whole business of caste, without even understanding that caste and jati, varna and jati are totally different systems. And in fact, it has been proven in Indian political history in the last 75 years that caste alliances and mobilizations are a vehicle of empowerment and upward mobility. And this history they've completely ignored. And finally, we come to the green. And the green is a kind of insidious, worldwide, often Pakistani-funded, think tank, lobbyist, and other coalition of interests, which are, for lack of a better word, we can call them not Islamic, but Islamist, which are really attacking, all varieties of Hinduism under the excuse of attacking Hindutva, you see? So you see this alliance of red, woke, and green playing out this anti-India, anti-Hindu narrative in different iterations in the Western world, in the United States and Canada, then in UK, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere. And now they're attacking Rishi Sunak as well, because he goes to a temple, he celebrates Diwali, they attack Tulsi Gabbard. And so this is going to be relentless. What I want to say is that we should look at it as an opportunity, because when Washington Post, New York Times, The Guardian, BBC, CNN also, your so-called parent or partner channel, when they all attack India, then people like you, Anand, and others in India will stand up and hit back. So this rallying of India and Indian forces, pro-Indian forces, a kind of awakened Hindu conscience all over the world, in UK, in Australia, and in the United States and elsewhere, is a fitting response, and this is really good. We have to wake up and roar. So it's not time for defense anymore, it's time for offense. And I want to go back to what was said earlier for a moment. It is time to actually name names and see how this alliance works in India, and how it's weakening us from within. We have to expose this alliance and create counter narratives, you see, and invite other partners. See, this is a big failure on the part of India, for example, that we are not a part of any conservative alliance anywhere in the world. Whereas the left liberals are completely integrated, for example. So we need to have alliances. We have to reach out to think tanks. We should find common cause. And I'm very grateful to the other panelists who have joined from different parts of the world, because I see like the sparks of a firefly all around. I see signs of this renaissance, signs of new alliances. And I must thank you, Anand, for your, I should say, very persistent campaign, which is highly informative to Indian audiences who tend to be very ill-informed about this global anti-India and anti-Hindu campaign. So thank you for this. Thank you.
The thing is, I'm trying to rise from 3 feet to about 30 feet, while trying to bring you down from 30,000 feet to about 300 feet. So then everybody can get a perspective which you have. And then when I say all of you, because you've been writing, talking and seeing this. I'm going to bring in Vasik, because thank you for your patience, just allowing everybody to air their thoughts. Vasik, where do you stand on this matter? Would you believe that there are parallels with Israel and with Bharat in terms of when this kind of narratives are fit? And are there alliances that have been stitched, especially among the intelligentsia, to try and drive this narrative? Is there a commonality?
Well, yes, I think there's some truth in that, and I think it's a mixture of a number of things. So, first of all, there appears to be a Western civilizational bias against sovereign nations such as Bharat and Israel. Now, these are relatively new nations that have emerged as a result of the independence, whether that's the formation of Israel or the partition of Bharat and the formation then of Pakistan. But we need to put this into context. Colonialism was bad enough when it first reared its ugly head, but it seems some in the West are hell-bent on shackling Bharat back into the chains of colonialism, both literally and intellectually. Now, the state of Bharat is a secular one, but the civilization for thousands of years has very much been rooted in the Hindu tradition. And what this does is that this poses a threat to Western leftists and Islamist extremists. So for the West, it shows that Bharatiyas are autonomous, sovereign people that can and have succeeded as Bharatiyas in academia, in culture, in economics and philosophy. And what this does is that it leaves Western leftists in a state of rage because they can't act like the world's police and sort out the savages, so to speak. And Western leftists, they hate this. They despise the fact that Bharat can survive without their intervention. And then let's have a look at the Islamists. Now, for Islamists, Bharat is a prime example of a nation that has flourished without the need of a caliphate ruled under Sharia law. So if you have a look at, for example, your population, you've got one of the biggest populations of Muslims. Now, Bharatian Muslims are living their best lives and proving to the Islamist mullahs that freedom of religion is best served in a nation rooted in the Hindu tradition that provides freedom of religion, is best served in a nation rooted in Hinduism, and it is clearly one that is much better than the supposedly one that's ordained by these Islamist extremists. So if you ask me why there is this unholy alliance between Western leftists and Islamists, well, there's your answer. Bharat is a success story, and that time and time again keeps proving itself against these naysayers. Let's put this again into perhaps economic terms.
Yeah.
So according to the IMF, the World Economic Outlook, for the year ending April 2021, the gross domestic product per capita of Bharat in 2021 was projected at over $2,000 at current prices. Now, if you take it back to all the way to 1993, Bharat's GDP per capita was 6.5% of global GDP per capita. So we saw that in this respect, there was a increase of 18.4% in terms of GDP. So you can see that Bharat just keeps outperforming so many other countries. It's not an accident that it is the fifth largest growing economy in the world. It's a fact that it is, and it's a fact that this is through its civilization, through everything that it's gone through, whether it's through colonialism, the terrorist attacks that it faces almost daily from Islamist extremists, from separatists, from some of the surrounding nations that it is facing in the same way that Israel also faces that. And so when we think about Bharat, we need to be thinking about it being a success story, and this is despite intervention from Western leftists or Islamist extremists. We don't need a caliphate. Bharat is very well served as a secular state and also one with a deep-rooted Hindic tradition.
Right. Now I've run out of time, but I'm going to push this for another 4 minutes. One minute to all our panelists again, just to summarize, saying how do we correct this? What do we do? So I'm going to start with Vasik, go to Dr. Paranjpe, Saraji, and then end with Vijayaji. So yes, Vasik, how do we counter this intelligentsia mafia kind of thing?
Well, I think we need to counter. We saw recently in Leicester the removal of an academic from a official review, and the reason why that was the case is because we were calling out some of these naysayers, some of these people who wanted to present something against British Hindus as if they were a threat, or whether the ideology of Hindutva was a threat. And we need to just keep calling them out with facts, with logic, with a good level of intelligence. That is not being provided against us. We're being provided with emotions, but if we can provide with logic, with facts, I think we can quite clearly defeat some of these people who are hell-bent on destroying Bharat as a nation.
Counter information, disinformation, and also a very informed counter, if that is provided, that could be a solution. Dr. Paranjpe?
Yes, I think that it has to be countered at multiple levels. At the level of the government and the state, they have to hire lobbyists in Washington, London, and other parts of the world. Let's not be innocent. There's lots of money and lots of, powerful people who are against India, and the government with its resources must, in my view, do more. Secondly, when it comes to civil society and when it comes to India itself, I find that we spend most of our time fighting with each other, attacking each other, and in a way disincentivizing competence. I always say in India we have competence deficit coupled with competence phobia, and that needs to end. We have to open our own minds, and there has to be a healthy spirit of self-criticism amongst us as well. But I think that it's not enough just to attack people. We have to create better books, better research, better, more reliable narratives of our own, and that's happening slowly. But it won't happen unless we invest a lot of time, energy, and incentivize excellence within India itself.
So incentivize excellence. One is information, start creating a counter mechanism. You also said we need cohesion. Everybody who has the alternative and wants to fight back needs to work together, but also need to up the level of competence internally. Saraji?
I think incentivization is fantastic. We certainly need to incentivize the youth to take up different degrees, especially, and I will say this, humanities. We need to take up dharmic social justice frameworks. We need to draw those social justice frameworks from our traditions. And I do feel very much part of these traditions, and I've done a lot of work to create my own epistemology and methodology that is absolutely drawn from the teachings of my sampradayas. And this should be welcome in academia, because Indigenous knowledge systems are now being protected within academia for every other Indigenous culture around the world except for Bharatias. So we also need to fight this at the systemic level, because we do have human rights. As much as people are entitled to criticise, and they can even make horrible statements about you online, if they're working in a particular industry and they're subject to codes of conduct, or if these institutions have policies, they're meant to protect you. Those policies are in place to make sure that we aren't all hurt by the people who are working in these institutions. And charities, the media, they're subject to certain regulations. Some of them aren't. The Guardian is self-regulating, which is tragic, and they don't listen. But we have to keep making the complaints, and do so in a way which is very legalistic. Rather than complaining about my feelings being hurt, you have to be very legalistic. You have to look at the criteria when you're making a complaint, and you need to be able to demonstrate that those parties have actually breached some type of code. If it's a human rights issue, if it's a civil rights issue, if it's a housing discrimination issue, every level of society has protections in place already. We don't need to tell them not to be anti-Hindu bigots. That's already there. You've got protections. It's just a matter of fighting for your rights. Everybody needs to fight for their rights. They have to be brave. They can't be what Lord Krishna would call impotent cowards. We can't have this anymore. And this attacking each other, bringing each other down, fighting among one another, it's real. It's really crazy. I mean, fighting over whether we should use terms like Hinduphobia or Hindu-misia is just crazy. You're going to throw away 150 years of word usage over what? It doesn't mean, well, it means so many things.
Use
if
both.
You look into it.
You
understand these things, and everybody, we need to work together. We need to uplift one another.
Absolutely.
And be one movement, because our enemies are one.
Very rightly said.
It's almost the fighting for the Ummah. They're fighting for every Muslim on the planet. So we need to think in those terms, and not just for Hindus. Also for other pagan civilizations, other indigenous cultures.
Very rightly said. All
and Jews.
All indigenous cultures need to be protected, and like you said, that you cannot be impotent cowards. Very rightly said. And more importantly, more need to be taught the basic core Indic systems or the local sampradayas, indigenous sampradayas. So Agastya Gurukulam has to be now not 400 students but 4 million, Vijayaji. So that's what needs to happen. And those who study humanities should have the ability to question their teachers and correct them when they try and subtly tell you that pedophilia is all right.
Yes. Also, till such time, like the other panelists have said, that we build our own drishti to solve these issues. There are some things that we name in the snakes in the Ganga. So one thing we can definitely do is to bring awareness to our billionaires who are, so the support structure has to be dismantled. The support structure that is enabling this kind of narrative to come through and break India, that has to be essentially countered. So we have to essentially dismantle that. So our billionaires are funding that. So we have to call them out and say what is going on, and let's have an open argument. If that's what they feel, then that's fine, but we need to have a debate on these issues. So that is number one. Number two is our own government. For example, the NEP has a lot of issues. They're bringing in these gender ideologies into the classroom for K to 12. So we need to counter them. Our government is sending our bureaucrats to Harvard for training. And what are they getting trained on? Is also the same narrative. They're getting indoctrinated so that they can go back into the bureaucracy and propagate this. So we need to call out our government on this, right? So it's good, fine to blame others, but we also need to clean up our own house, right? And so we need to call the government on this and say, the Niti Aayog has all experts from Harvard to solve problems of India. I think we have enough brain power to, this colonized mentality that we have, right? That anything from the West is great, has to go. And we have enough brain power locally that we can use. We have, like I said, professors like Professor Vaidyanathan and others who can bring in and give advice to the government on what needs to be done. They have a better idea as to what India needs, as opposed to getting foreign help for these things. So even the government has to be cleaned up. Right? And then at a family level, we should tell our parents that send children abroad for a liberal arts education to not do that, not spend the money till such time that we develop these fields of excellence at home on the ground. So till that time, we can at least stop the leakage of all of this. So why should we spend our hard-earned money on a liberal arts curriculum that is essentially making...
Vijay, I have to wind up, but it circles back to what Sara ji, Dr. Paranjpe and Vasif Kasik have also said, that we first need to learn to work together and cohesive and unite. Because that's why we always like an other, somebody from the outside to come and do it, because we can't work ourselves together. That's why we are all conversing in English and not Sanskritam or any other original Bharatiya Bhasha. There is a reason why, because everybody said, let us get English because we don't want Hindi. Others said we don't want Tamil. A third said we don't want Bengali or Marathi. So that's where it all got stuck, frankly. And imagine if we were all speaking our own Bharatiya Bhashas, our own cultures, our own knowledge systems would have also been preserved, because that's one way to erase it. It's a longer discussion, and I hope to have that soon with the same panel very, very soon. But for the moment, I have to wind up.
Anand, English is also a Bharatiya Bhasha.
Now,
don't worry.
now.
English is very much a Bharatiya Bhasha. Don't worry.
Now. Namaste. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Dhanyavad. Thank you. We're going to take a short break, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back, what's happened in Canada, in Brampton, where once again in a temple, the mayor of the region, Patrick Brown, has been called out because of this brazen anti-Hindu propaganda and, more importantly, an anti-Bharat propaganda. The Khalistani flags being waved, Hindus being derided, trying to create this narrative that Sikhs are separate from Hindustan and Hindus, and that's what is stemming. It's a very, very brazen political effort, dangerous one. We talk about it when we come back. Stay with us.
To these silly and foolish and something they are what they are doing. Do you remember I had offered that I want to be relieved of the Chancellor's position? Why they wrote 4 letters to me, pleading with me. And finally the last letter, draft they sent to me in the Raj Bhavan, which draft will be acceptable to me. I made the amendments. No if and but, and Chief Minister's letter assuring that there will be no interference in the universities, not only by the government but by any source. Only then they were able to persuade me to resume the duties of Vice Chancellor.
നമുക്ക് ഗവർണർ എടുത്തുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്ന ഏതറ്റം വരെയും പോകുന്ന ഒരു നിലപാടിനെ നിയമപരമായിട്ടും ഭരണഘടനാപരമായിട്ടും നമുക്ക് ഫലപ്രദമായി എങ്ങനെ പ്രതിരോധിക്കാമെന്ന കാര്യം പാർട്ടി കൃത്യമായിട്ട് ചർച്ച ചെയ്ത് തീരുമാനത്തിലെത്തിയിട്ടുള്ളതാണ്. ഏതറ്റം വരെയും പോകാം. അത് പിന്നെ ഏതറ്റം വരെയും പോകാമെങ്കിൽ എന്തു ആവാം. അതാണ് സർക്കാരിന് ആവശ്യമായ നിലപാട് സ്വീകരിക്കാം. ബില്ലുകൾ തടഞ്ഞു വെച്ചിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ബില്ലുകൾ തടഞ്ഞു വെച്ചതുമായിട്ട് ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് നിയമപരമായതും ഭരണഘടനാപരവുമായിട്ടുള്ള പ്രശ്നങ്ങൾ എങ്ങനെയൊക്കെ കൈകാര്യം ചെയ്യണമെന്നുള്ള കാര്യം ആലോചിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഗവൺമെൻറ് ആലോചിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. ഗവർണറെ ചാൻസലർ സ്ഥാനത്ത് കേരള ഗവൺമെൻറ്റിൻ്റെ നിയമത്തിൻ്റെ അടിസ്ഥാനപ്പെടുത്തിയിട്ടാണത് യഥാർത്ഥത്തിൽ അധികാരം കിട്ടിയിട്ടുള്ളത്. ആ അധികാരം നൽകേണ്ടതുണ്ടോ എന്ന കാര്യം ചർച്ച ചെയ്യേണ്ടുന്ന അവസ്ഥയിലേക്കാണ് കാര്യങ്ങൾ വന്ന് നിൽക്കുന്നത്. ആവശ്യമായ നിലപാട് നമുക്ക് സ്വീകരിക്കേണ്ടി വരും.
Okay, my colleague Neetu is with us right now to bring us more context. Neetu, we played out for our audiences a few minutes ago a governor's response to the media. And just seeing his anger, that kind of anger from a government official seems unprecedented. Could you bring us more context as to what's brought him to this point? What is the context to this story? And then tell us what we have to look forward to today, please.
See, the governor was quite angry today, saying that he will not speak to two regional media channels, two Malayalam channels, Kairali News and Kairali TV and Media One. He says that they are running a propaganda against them and they are comrades masquerading media persons, and so that is why that is a response that we saw from Kochi, from Kerala Governor Arif Mohammed Khan, quite unprecedented, and he's asking the reporters of two channels to get out from that space where he was about to respond. Now, looking forward today, what we have is that this is the last day of Chancellor that the governor as Chancellor has given to the Vice Chancellors to respond. He had sent show cause notice to 11 of them, and they have time till today. So 6 of them have already responded, and we are expecting that the others is also most likely to submit their response by today. So it's after that the governor will take into consideration all this, and then he'll take a decision on this. So it was after the Supreme Court verdict on one of the vice chancellors, that is a vice chancellor of APJ Abdul Kalam Technological University. It was after that Supreme Court order which found that appointment not valid because it did not fulfill the UGC guidelines. So based on that, the governor is saying that all these 11 vice chancellors appointments do not fulfill. So based on the Supreme Court order, he has to do that. As chancellor, it was the governor himself who had appointed all these 11 people on the recommendations from the Search and Selection Committee.
Face off between the governor, Arif Mohammed, who you can see on the left side of your screens, and the Kerala government continues. This is just one more chapter. You might remember that a little while ago, the governor had given a show cause notice to 9 university vice chancellors. 6 out of the 9 have responded. These VCs have moved the Kerala High Court last Wednesday against the show cause notice issued to them by the governor. Remember, what the governor was alleging was that the appointment process of the vice chancellors violated the University Grants Commission norms, and because of that, they must resign. Now, I want to take you through reactions to this story, then we'll connect.
Our position on the efforts by anti-Indian elements to hold a so-called Khalistan referendum is well known. It has been conveyed to the Canadian government, both in New Delhi and in Canada.
This Khalistani agenda, this propaganda is assuming dangerous proportions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, those people who've been pushing to separate Bharat, break Bharat, these anti-India forces are now sowing the seeds of serious divide, where they're trying to say that Sikhs and Hindus are different. Hindus are the others, the othering, and there are young second, third, fourth generation Hindus who are part of this, which is a serious worry. One does not care much for the likes of the Spannum and gang, but what they're being able to do on Canadian soil with the numbers that they're being able to gather is a cause for concern. India has seriously raised these issues with the Canadian government, but should we have truck and business with Canada if they continue to allow this secessionist and this trying to sow the divide, seeds of divide between Sikhs and Hindus as people, as ethnicity, and trying to say that Sikhs are different from Hindus and Hindus need to be hated under the garb of freedom of speech? That's the big question. Hari Sikka ji is with us, Abhijit Iyer Mitra and Pate Suresh Krishnamurthy with us this evening. is this entire Khalistani propaganda getting out of hand. Hari Sikka ji, the biggest concern, and I say namaste to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Hari Sikka ji, the Canadians who are there, they're all the Indians who have migrated. Or if there are 5,000 Canadians there, then there are about 15,000 people back home in India who are getting influenced in Punjab. It's a serious concern.
Serious concern it is, but we are failing on some aspects, and let's check at the ground level first. We are unable to tell people in Punjab where this word Khalistan came from. It was not by Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak, on the contrary, said, when he complained to God when Babar attacked, he said, Khorasan khasmana kiya, Hindustan daraya. He used the word and he asked God, ताकि दर्द ना आया, आपको दर्द नहीं हुआ कि हमें हिंदुस्तान को, Guru Nanak said. So he referred the country as Hindustan for the first time. Now come to the word Khalistan. Where did it erupt from? It was, we are unable to explain to people that it happened post Operation Blue Star. It was Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi and subsequently the Congress ploy to divide India or to create a Khalistan so that the votes and the things can be captured. And when this Blue Star happened, the Sikhs were very, very annoyed. When the killers of Indira Gandhi were immediately hanged, but 10,000 people killed and nobody was touched, not even FIR. So that created a lot of animosity within. And that was played up. Played up by whom? Your next door neighbor. Now, come to the third point. Who's funding it? It's very easy. Punjab is an open border for drugs. So your money, 12,600 villages in Punjab, all drugged. Every village has lost 12 to 30 children, young students, male members of the family, and no questions asked. So that money has apparently funded. Now what happens in the system in Canada? When you land in Canada, and the first town is Brampton, or closer to the airport. So those people who land, for whatever reasons, they go as farmers and whatever. So the Gurdwaras fund them. You go to that place, visit those locations, and you will find that their roti, pani, kapda, makan, everything is taken care of. Who funds it? It's very simple. It's an open secret. I'll also explain it to you during farmers, this jung that happened, farmers agitation. What happened? It is known to government that Kejriwal took money from Khalistanis. It's an open secret. We are unable to make headway into that. So we are at fault in certain aspects of life. And not collect all Sikhs together. I have worked enormously during the making of Nanak Shah Fakir, which was approved down the line from Akal Tak to SGPC. But select Khalistanis, headed by one Mr. Pannu. Unfortunately, one of his members was, without my knowledge, working with my film. And when he was sacked, removed for various reasons, including this, he was the one who played ball with or otherwise, and made sure that there's a drama against Nanak Shah Fakir where it shows Guru Nanak Sahib was born to a Hindu family. He said, Manas ki jaat sab hai eko pehchan bo, ek noor te sab jag upja. He was born to a Hindu family. It was explained in Nanak Shah Fakir. 50 million followers of this film in 3-4 channels of the YouTube Geo Cinema, and still the Khalistanis, handful of them, ensured that the film had to be taken out from the theatres because they were threatening theatre owners. Handful of them. Collect all the Sikhs together. Suppose there are, say, X number of, say, 100 Khalistanis, 100 people, 100 Sikhs, suppose a number. Only 2 Sikhs would be believer in Khalistan.
Right.
Ask us. I'm a soldier. Ask us. Ask a student in a college.
No, I agree. College. I agree, Harry.
Their only biggest regret is. Their biggest regret is 1984.
Correct.
Why is Jagdish Titler, Kamal Nath?
I totally agree. I totally agree with you, sir. I totally
Why
agree.
Are they roaming free?
I totally agree with you, sir. But those two should also not be with Khalistan. That's what I'm saying. And if we are seeing youngsters, young generations in Canada being influenced like this, like you said, a handful are enough to try and derail an entirely good cause, like you gave your example of your own movie. Abhijit Iyer Mitra.
Thanks, Anand. So, see, first let's put this in perspective. 70,000 Sikhs turned up for this. The total population of Sikhs in Canada is 800,000, 8 lakhs. All right. So it turns out that the most of the Sikh population of Canada have voted with their feet and decided not to attend this referendum. Second, remember, Labour and especially Trudeau, who is one of the most disgusting practitioners of identity politics around, they've used this sort of Sikh extremist fringe to, beat up Sikhs, to terrorize Sikhs, and essentially impose the voice of an extremist minority on the community at large, to such an extent where we find that a lot of Sikh friends of ours who are really non-committal about any of this are just too scared to open their mouths. Do you remember Mr. Dosanjh, the premier of one of the things, who got beaten up and nearly killed by Sikh extremists? All of this is mainstreamed and utilized for political purposes by Justin Trudeau. More so Justin Trudeau than Labour, though Labour has always had this streak.
Right.
The third is the sheer hypocrisy of Justin Trudeau, which he always seems to get away with. That on one hand, he condemns the Russian referenda held in the 4 regions of Ukraine, and then goes around holding a referendum on a region, on a completely undisputed region of India in his own country without taking any action about it. Right. And finally, we need to understand, as Mr. Sikka said, there is a nexus between drugs, between Pakistan, between opening that corridor. Why was that corridor to Guru Nanak's birthplace opened? Right. In the 80s, it was Pakistani sort of paying Sikh terrorists to go do the killings in Punjab. These days, the Sikh community or certain elements of the Sikh community, either through terrorization aided and abetted by Justin Trudeau and the Labour government in Canada, they are paying money to the ISI to do certain things and see to it that certain things happen, which kind of enable an environment where, another sort of...
Well, but what happens is, Abhijit Iyer Mitra, like I said, in terms of the percentile, the opening of the Kartarpur corridor is landmark for crores of Sikhs or lakhs of Sikhs who've been wanting to go and pay darshan. So that's one point. But the presence of entities like Gopal Singh Chawla and others who are then seen around, and Rinda and some of the others who are also seen with members of the Akal Takht and others, that is a cause for concern. I agree, it's a security concern. Pattai Suresh Krishnamurthy, I have limited time. Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to what Mitraji was saying, we don't even have to go far to look for Justin Trudeau's hypocrisy. He was vehemently opposed, and he still is vehemently opposed, to any talk of secessionism from Quebec. And Quebec has been going through secessionist talks for a very long time.
Even from his father's time.
This whole notion of secessionism is kind of a sideshow for those of us who live and breathe in the United States and Canada. 13 states in the United States have constantly come up and said, oh, we're going to leave the country. There are cities that have said, we're going to leave the state, and so on and so forth. We kind of look at it as kind of a sideshow a little bit, but it is unfortunate that Canadian citizens, presumably those who are voting in this referendum, are presumably either Canadian PRs or probably even Canadian citizens. I wonder how they would react if the government of India took them up on their offer and said, okay, you guys want to leave India, fine, your passport's cancelled, goodbye. I don't know how they would react to that. This whole notion of secessionism and a quick exit every time you have some kind of a difficulty with the government is just silly.
Yeah.
The other very interesting thing is, if you look at a map of Khalistan that is being produced, it is entirely within the borders of current India.
Yeah.
Now, Punjab, of course, was divided in two by partition.
Yes.
There's a significant portion of Punjab.
No, and that's where the hypocrisy is. In fact, I remember when they tried to peddle this narrative, I called Pannu when he ran away at that time. I said, where is the Khalistan if you're not asking for anything from Pakistan? Ask for all of that first. I have to wind up. We'll take this forward. We'll take this forward for the moment. I thank all our guests. Have run over time. Thank you for your time. Stay with us. Brass Tacks follows.
Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zakir Jacob. The Supreme Court today upheld by 3-2 majority the centre's decision to have 10% quota for economically weaker sections. The majority judgment ruled that this was in keeping with the basic structure of the Constitution and there is nothing wrong in reservations based on economic factors. The opposition, though, is arguing that this is laying the ground for economic reservations for forward castes, and that is not what the Founding Fathers had in mind when it comes to affirmative action. Will this open a can of worms as far as changing the very definition or the intention of reservation is concerned? Who should have a problem with poor folks, whether they are from the general category or OBCs or SCs, if poor folks are given a leg up, whether it is in government jobs or in education? But first, the story of a significant judgment today, which by majority the Supreme Court upheld.
It's a big win for the Modi government. 3 out of 2 judges in a Supreme Court bench upheld 10% reservation in jobs and education given to the economically weaker sections since 2019. Justice Maheshwari said reservation singularly on economic background does not violate any essential feature of the Constitution. Justice Trivedi said exclusion of SCs and STs from such reservation is not unreasonable. Justice Pardiwala said it's necessary to take into review the manner of identification and ways of determining backward classes. But the dissenting judgment came from outgoing Chief Justice of India, UU Lalit, and Justice Bhatt, who said it violates the non